Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong, and I want to thank our underwriter, Audiobooks.com, for making this program possible. As always, if you aren't able to stick with us through the entire program, you can pick it up later as a podcast on our Facebook page, Good Books Radio, or you can go to our YouTube channel, Good Books Radio. Today we have a fascinating book that is sociological and it's political and is a kind of a rediscovered book in the wake of the Trump miracle, if we want to call it that. The book is by Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here, which was a very popular book in its own time back in the 30s. And it has been resurrected because it has such resonance with contemporary politics. And also, it is there's another book that is Orwell's 1984 has also seen a resurgence. I think this Sinclair Lewis book has increased in sales by something like 2,000%. We are going to be talking with Dr. Sally Perry, who's an associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences at Illinois State University. She is an expert on Sinclair Lewis, and she's going to talk to us about how this book is relevant today. She is the executive director of the Sinclair Lewis Society and editor of the Sinclair Lewis Society newsletter. She is well published, of course, on Sinclair Lewis. So we have her on the phone here. How are you today, Dr. Perry?
Fine, thanks. It's good to talk to you.
Well, thank you for joining us. I understand from the number of interviews you've been doing that not only is this book popular, but talking about it is very popular.
It is. This is my 10th interview of the day, and I'm still I'm still happy to talk about Sinclair Lewis. It's this is the most I've ever talked about Sinclair Lewis in such a short period of time, actually.
Well, can you tell us at what point did someone, and maybe you're the one, a year or two ago say, you know what, this Trump phenomenon is very similar to Sinclair Lewis's description of what happened in It Can't Happen Here?
Well, I think it's kind of a zeitgeist because we're seeing, a rise also in sales for 1984, mm-hmm. Margaret Atwood's A Handmaid's Tale, that sort of thing. But I think that It Can't Happen Here spoke to people because the title itself has become such a catchphrase that there's sort of a kind of American exceptionalism connected with it that fascism or political unrest or whatever happens in other places, in South America, in the Middle East, in Europe, but it can't happen here because we're special, we're different. And as people are saying it, they're saying, but there seems to be something going on that is eerily similar in many ways. I think of the novels I was mentioning, probably this one speaks to people more than the others in that it actually deals with a presidential election and a candidate who uses media in much the same way and who is also very isolationist and xenophobic.
I think that last week when, I forget who it was, used the phrase of alternative facts.
Oh, Kellyanne Conway,
Kellyanne Conway, she said, we have alternative facts that need to be considered. I think it was in relation to the photographs of the number of people in attendance at the inauguration that she was referring to, that we have alternative mm-hmm. facts that we are considering. And that became very much a 1984 type of expression. So I think the internet lit up over that because it was so much in tune with the clock struck 13.
Oh, it's true, and I think that the rise of various kinds of electronic media has made a big difference in terms of this whole alternative facts idea that you can fiddle around with pictures, you can fiddle around with how you're delivering a message, and if you don't either read or participate or listen to a lot of different sources, you can get kind of caught up in a sort of an alternative reality, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Well, it used to make absolute and unassailable sense to me when Moynihan said, "You are entitled to your opinion, but not to your facts." And now it seems that we're entitled to our facts too.
Oh, and that's such a troubling, it's such a troubling issue because, if you're careful, obviously you're making decisions based on things that are really happening. So, and if you're making decisions based on things that you think might be true, the consequences can be absolutely awful.
Yes. Yes, it's true. I hear people today, though, when you say to them, "Here are the facts," and they'll say, "And where does that come from?" And I'll say, "Well, I got this from, NPR." And they'll say, "Well, of course, NPR, that's a leftist, rag, so you can't trust that." And so people just immediately impugn the source, no matter what if it differs from their belief system.
Well, and I think part of that is connected to the rise of so many different kinds of media. When I was growing up, the news was on the three main stations, and if Walter Cronkite said it, it was true, and we all trusted Walter Cronkite.
And you couldn't tell where Walter Cronkite's politics laid.
No, that's true. I mean, as a journalist, he was truly trying to be very even-handed, and so much of. I mean, I still think that media outlets like NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so forth are very reliable. But you're right. I think there is a bias against media outlets that you don't agree with. So if something is on Fox, you say, "Oh, it's on Fox. Does that really count?" Now, when something is on Fox and on CNN, you say, "Oh, well, maybe that must be true." It's kind of where the confluence of facts comes from, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I saw something recently, a fairly massive study by the Pew Institute. Pew, that's right, yeah. And they were looking at what sources are indeed fair and balanced, or at least perceived by both sides, by everybody as being trustworthy. And one of those was The Economist, and the other was the BBC.
Yes, I can certainly see that.
But not BBC America, BBC.
Right. Well, I know when I'm traveling overseas, the BBC is what I watch because because it actually covers world news as opposed to just it's not all very localized sort of stuff.
Yes, that's true. When I was years ago in Africa for a while, I would every afternoon, by shortwave radio, tune in BBC or Radio France International, which was in English, but it was a very similar sort of broadcast, and that's how I stayed in touch with the world. There was by shortwave radio. But let's talk about Sinclair Lewis, this particular book. Why is the main character here, Buzz? Why is he like Trump?
Okay, well, I think there are a couple of reasons. One of them is that both Trump and Windrip were a master of their respective medias. In the world of the novel, Windrip uses the radio a lot, and he also draws on a lot of other radio commentators. So it's kind of like an early version of Rush Limbaugh and those sorts of people. He has radio commentators, including a sort of lightly fictionalized version of Father Charles Coughlin, who had a huge radio following in the 30s. And so he's able to do that. He's also able to use rhetoric in such a way that he portrays himself as a very kind of man of the people, kind of a populist person that the ordinary person can relate to. And I think Trump does something that is from a scholarly point of view, is phenomenally interesting in that he celebrates being rich and having all of this stuff. At the same time, he also presents himself as an ordinary person because he talks like an ordinary person. And that he's able to mesh those two things together is fascinating. And so I think both Trump and this fictional character are able to do that. And they're also, the other thing that they do that's interesting is that they're able to identify a significant part of the population who feels left out. So in the world of the book, I mean, it came out during the Great Depression, so there were a lot of people that were unemployed, underemployed. They were scared to death about what their future held. Trump has done very much the same thing, focusing on areas of the country where there is underemployment or unemployment, and a lot of that is because the world has changed in the way that goods are manufactured, the way that they're shipped around, and everything, and it's almost as though both of them are offering a chance to get back to some kind of golden past. Not that this past ever existed, or if it existed for a sort of privileged small number. But I think that the hope or the desire for this time period when there's full employment and everybody kind of gets what they deserve, I mean that in a good way, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
is something that people find hard to resist.
Well, it is a kind of Hitlerian model because Hitler was very good at identifying the reason that you're poor or the reason you're suffering is because of these greedy people over here. In this case, he was blaming it on the Jews. You are struggling because the Jews are hoarding the money. And it's not your fault that you are poor. It's their fault that you're poor.
Well, I think that sort of us versus them strategy works in a lot of different ways. The Windrip of the book does something similar, and it's kind of us versus them, and that's kind of what isolationism is anyway. We're good, they're not, and so if you can set up this dichotomy between the good us and then all those other people who aren't Americans, they're not smart, they're whatever they're not, and Trump does very much the same thing, identifying somebody to speak against. So it's telling and kind of depressing that late in the novel, as the country is getting more and more fascist, but also there's more and more political unrest, Windrip decides to declare war on Mexico.
Yes.
And, yeah.
How familiar.
All the stuff yes, indeed. And his reasoning, and it's smart reasoning, is that people don't, they create an incident, and the idea is that although you may disagree with what's going on politically, if somebody attacks us from the outside, of course we band together, and because we want to fight the enemy. So by creating an enemy, even if you have to manufacture the reasons for it, everybody will come together. And given all of the talk about the wall and the huge tariffs on Mexican products and everything right now, I find it really eerie.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he's declared a kind of, an economic war on Mexico, but the problem is, at least the way he's proposed declaring the war, is that we end up paying for the wall.
Well, yeah, that didn't come into the equation when he was promoting it, because it's going to cost billions of dollars. And I'm just thinking not only from an economic point of view, but from a geographic point of view. There's a river in there. There's a big river, and you can't really do it. And people are ingenious. If they want to get in badly enough, there's tunnels, there's climbing over the walls. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And although I know that there's been a reduction in immigrants, the more people that are desperate, whether we're talking about refugees from the Middle East or economic refugees from various parts of Central America, they'll find a way in.
Well, if you go in and you devastate the economy of Mexico, then you're going to have an immigration problem like you've never seen before. They say in Texas, one of the common things you hear people say is that if you build a 20-foot wall, you will simply build a market for 21-foot ladders.
Yep. I think that's good. When he announced that last week, I went to the grocery store that afternoon, and I was just noticing, okay, the blackberries are from Mexico. A lot of the produce is, and especially since California has had such a terrible drought for the last couple of years, more of the produce has been coming through Mexico than ever before. So it would also be hurting the American consumer quite a bit.
So like Windrip in the novel, Trump is good at identifying the scapegoats that we can blame for our troubles, that Mexico has stolen our jobs, that, Mexico has sent all of their bad people to America, which has increased our crime rate, and sent their drugs here and forced them down people's throats so that they've increased our drug problem in our cities. Right?
Oh, yes.
And on and on. And the Chinese have devalued the currency, which helps them to undercut us. And some of this, no doubt, is true. You throw enough mud, something will stick. Some of it is no doubt true. But there is an enormous hypocrisy in this, because the same guy is telling people not to manufacture their goods abroad has his suits manufactured abroad. The same guy who is telling drug companies to lower their prices is not lowering his prices at his hotels.
Of course. I mean, and it's so ironic that a large part of his strategy is very much based on a sort of an isolationist America First type idea. But on the other hand, this is somebody whose companies are involved in different kinds of hotels and whatnot throughout the world. So he's participating in a global economy at the same time he's decrying it as something that is hurting American workers.
And that seems to be a consistency in this type of character within fiction, is that they get to have it both ways.
Absolutely. Buzz Windrip in the novel, he drinks with people when it's necessary. He becomes a teetotaler when people aren't drinking. So it's religious when necessary, not so religious when he doesn't have to worry about it. And given the wide variety of remarks that Trump has made, on the one hand, after the before the inauguration, he went to church. But on the other hand, he has spoken out. I mean, he has behaved in a lot of, misogynistic, very unchristian-like ways. So it's kind of like, do what I do, not what do what I say, not what I do. It's very frustrating to try and pin down somebody who sort of alters his politics just to suit the mood of the media or the occasion.
And his followers will tell you, if you bring up any of those contradictions, they will just say, well, get your big boy pants on. This is the way the world works. So don't be a snowflake. So.
Well, I guess the thing is there any kind of ethical platform on which this is all based? And I think that's a serious question to ask of him and his nominees. Is there any kind of ethical or moral platform on which they're acting? I mean, ideally it should be for the good of the American people and putting your own personal interest behind, so that you can accomplish something that will benefit a lot of people. But I don't see that happening. I mean,
well, we shall see. It is possible that these policies will benefit some of his constituency. I mean, I don't know. Generally, when you start tinkering with markets, there's all kinds of unintended consequences that can be negative. And I personally believe that a lot of the problems with the disappearance of old industrial jobs has more to do with robotics than it has to do with outsourcing of jobs. Robotics is taking over a lot of the manufacturing everywhere.
Well, I think that's true. As we become a more technologically astute society, there are machines that can do lots of things that at one time required people. So, you think back to the making of the Model T. There were 20 people who put together a car, and nowadays it's probably one person overseeing a bunch of machines that puts things together. And it's just the way things have transpired over time.
And these are the first people to experience this displacement, but these disruptive technologies are going to disrupt other parts of society that don't expect it, even doctors, college professors.
Well, you figure you live in a small town, and if the town I live in we have several. It's Bloomington Normal, so we have a university and a couple of colleges and so forth, and also State Farm Insurance. But we also have we had Mitsubishi Motor Company, and they moved out of town, and a number of people became unemployed. Now there's other sources of work for a lot of people. But if you have a town that's based primarily in manufacturing, and that plant either moves away or is smaller or whatever, people not only lose their jobs, but they don't have money to pay, you're right, the doctor or the grocer or the dentist or whatever. And so there's a tremendous snowball effect.
Well, there is, and what the point I'm making is that these technologies are going to be disruptive in the sense that they will replace doctors in some cases, because these artificial intelligence programs can do what a lot of doctors do in terms of diagnosing. And they can, and same thing for college professors. You can take an automated course, put it online, and people don't even have to go to class. They can just take it and complete it and take tests and everything. It can be automated. And so more and more we're going to be seeing the classes that thought themselves immune from this sort of disruption also, being hurt by them.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think that those people who are well educated probably can be a little bit more flexible in the sorts of things that they can do. But those who don't have a lot of education, and this unfortunately speaks to another problem. When you have the rise of charter schools and private education that's crowding out funding for public education, that they're less able to compete in a marketplace that has become global and requires more knowledge, whether it's technical knowledge or something, than before. And I don't see the world going backwards in time.
Yeah, well, it is as always. It will adapt. Things will be different, and people will find that they need someone to fix the robots. There will be new careers there. But in this book by Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here, is there a streak of anti-intellectualism in it?
On the part of Windrip and his followers, definitely. A lot of the teachers and whatnot are not only made fun of by Windrip and his followers, but as fascism kind of works its way throughout the country, a lot of universities are done away with, and the regime says, well, we don't really need them. We need practical things. So most of the colleges that remain, most of them teach practical subjects. So literature, philosophy, history, it doesn't really matter anymore. So, you teach agriculture, you teach accounting, you teach those things that have sort of a one-to-one correlation between what you study and what kind of job you get. The foreign languages disappears because who needs it? And so anything that smacks of intellectualism is basically shut down.
And we're seeing that. I mean, just last week, Trump wants to get rid of the endowment for the humanities and endowment for the arts, which also carries the budget for National Public Radio and PBS, which are considered by many right-wing people as the enemy. And so they want to get rid of it because they don't want to fund something that they see as counter to their interests. And so I think of Churchill, his famous saying in World War II when people said, we got to cut the arts budget because we have a war going on and we need the money. And he said, well, then what are we fighting for? Well,
I think that's absolutely right. It's kind of like the Affordable Health Care Act. A lot of Republicans say, I'm terribly against it. And then you say, well, what are you against? Are you against, having your children on your insurance till they're 26? Well, no, not that. Are you against people who have pre-existing conditions
having
being
health care
covered by insurance? Yeah, and so it's kind of what exactly are they against beyond the idea of it? And again, it goes back to actually thinking about things or reading about things as opposed to just saying it's a right-wing or a left-wing sort of thing, because you say, well, okay, public broadcasting, but that's also like Big Bird, that's Sesame Street. Everybody likes Sesame Street, so you have to. It's more nuanced than I think people often react to.
Well, when they tried to cut PBS in the 80s, I think, in the Reagan years, Mr. Rogers testified, and evidently was very powerful in reaching these senators, and so ultimately they decided they couldn't put the axe to Mr. Rogers and Big Bird, and it just would look bad for the children.
Yeah, and it was interesting too that Ronald Reagan, of all people, would be promoting something like that, given that he came from an arts background, that he was in the movies for so long, and well aware of the power of movies and documentary film and things like that.
Well, usually the belief is that we can, that should be funded privately and by venture capitalists or whatever. It should not be, the role of government to pay for, things that I don't believe in, because if I fund the arts, my God, just imagine the sort of things that people are going to write or draw or paint, and I don't need to fund things I disagree with, but that's democracy. I mean, I pay for all sorts of fighter jets that I probably don't care to see existing. It's not important in my value system that we have the most powerful jets ever created by man. I think we got to have jets, we got to have an army, we got to have a military, but that we have a lot that's unnecessary.
Well, that's true. Or kind of like communities that say, yes, we'll pass all these sales taxes or whatever so we can build a football stadium. And, if supposing you don't like football. And, and there have been numerous studies that say investment in the arts brings much more money into a community than football does, because there are a very limited number of games that are played, and most of the money goes right back to the team. It doesn't go to the community because, you go in and you buy all your stuff within the stadium and then you go home.
And the lion's share of a lot of those football stadiums are actually paid by visitors. They put it into the hotel taxes, so that it's doubly rude. You're the guest and you're paying for their house. It's very odd. Well, listen, we only have about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
We wandered around generously here. So what do you make of this rise of Sinclair Lewis? This isn't really one of his top novels, is it?
Well, I think it's probably not as artistically put together as some of his books from the 20s, for example. On the other hand, I think, like some of his other books, it captures it captures a part of American society in a way that nobody else had done. So he wrote it incredibly quickly in 8 weeks or something. And so there's some messiness, and you can say, oh well, there is. So it's not perfectly written. On the other hand, I think sometimes the messiness kind of connects to the sort of frenetic atmosphere as fascism takes over, despite the fact that people really aren't expecting it or don't believe it or something like that.
I think it's important to say also that the book is fairly extreme in the outcomes, and it may well be that Trump only wants to do these things that he said he would do, and then he will, mellow out, so to speak, in terms of being more centrist. Because this guy took over Winthrop. He took over the military right away, and he started, the concentration camps fairly quickly. I mean, wow, this was fast, and we don't see any of that from Trump at this point. So.
Well, that's true, and I mean, one of the things that Winthrop starts out with that Donald Trump certainly hasn't had is a sort of paramilitary organization, the Minutemen. He develops that while he's running for president. So he kind of, by the time he's elected, he already has in place a military arm, which thankfully hasn't come to pass. And I think that makes a lot of difference, especially when the country becomes fascist. What it seems rather quickly, and a lot of congressmen are arrested and things like that.
And there were a lot of people who thought that Obama was fascist. They thought he was a dictator, and so you can take these metaphors and overlay them in lots of circumstances according to your standpoint. Well, listen, thanks a lot for joining us today. I've enjoyed our conversation enormously, and I thank you for calling our attention to this book. It's a great read, and it's a great read particularly given these times, these interesting times that we are living in. I've been talking today with Dr. Sally Perry, who is Associate Dean in the College of Arts and Sciences at Illinois State University, about Sinclair Lewis's book, It Can't Happen Here. It's a good read. Pick it up. For Good Books Radio, I've been your host today, Dr. W.F. Strong. Here's hoping that all your books are good reads.